I moved into Patriot's Hollow on a Tuesday morning that smelled faintly of lilacs and fresh paint. The moving truck's wheels left tracks in the perfect gravel, and I had the sinking feeling that someone, somewhere, was already noting it down for an HOA complaint. My new house sat at the corner of Independence Lane and Valor Court, a cream-colored colonial with black shutters and a porch swing that creaked like a nervous laugh when the wind picked up. The real estate listing had used words like quaint charm and rich history. I didn't realize then that rich history was shorthand for unquiet dead. The house was a foreclosure. Cheap for the area, too cheap. The previous owners had moved suddenly. My agent said it with a smile that was too rehearsed, as if she'd been told not to elaborate. I didn't ask. At 29, newly divorced and exhausted by city life, all I wanted was quiet, the kind that doesn't talk back or demand answers. When I parked, 3 neighbors appeared like a mirage of Stepford perfection. A woman in pearls and tennis whites carried a wicker basket lined with gingham cloth. A man in khakis followed, holding a clipboard like it was an extension of his spine. Behind them trailed a teenager, pale as a ghost, wearing a Patriot's hoodie 2 sizes too big. "Susie Dunn," the woman chirped, already knowing my name. "Welcome to Patriot's Hollow. I'm Margaret from the Heritage Committee." "Heritage?" I repeated, wiping my palms on my jeans. Her smile sharpened. "Oh yes, we're very proud of our history here. Every brick laid on hallowed ground, every hedge trimmed with care. The land has memory." The man with the clipboard, Mr. Lowell, I would later learn, nodded solemnly. "Community pride keeps us safe, keeps things peaceful." The teenager just stared. I thought he was bored until I noticed he wasn't blinking. His eyes darted to the house, then the yard, and then to the large oak tree in the corner. A single red ribbon fluttered from one of its branches, tied there like an offering. "What's that for?" I asked. Margaret's tone brightened again, but her eyes flicked, quick and nervous, toward the tree. "Decoration. We all keep reminders of the Colonial Rules, just in case." "Colonial Rules? Oh, you'll see," she said breezily, placing the basket in my hands. "It's all in the welcome packet. We expect full participation in Heritage Month, of course. Parade, reenactments, lawn standards. Don't dig after dark," the boy muttered suddenly. Margaret shot him a look so sharp it could have sliced linen. "Daniel," he shrugged, mumbling. "What? She should know. That's how they come back." A breeze rolled through the street, rattling the flagpoles and sending a faint smell of smoke through the air. Old, acrid, and metallic. The adults didn't seem to notice, but the boy's gaze followed the drifting scent, as if it were leading him somewhere he didn't want to go. I glanced toward the end of the cul-de-sac, where a marble monument stood between 2 maples, a stone rider atop a horse, head missing. The plaque below read, "Captain Thaddeus Crane, Defender of Crossridge. The land remembers." The statue's horse reared up, its hooves frozen mid-stomp. A single black scorch mark stained the pavement beneath it, like something had burned there long ago. Margaret noticed my stare and forced a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "We keep the memorial clean, out of respect. That's part of the rules too." "What happens if someone doesn't?" I asked, half joking. Mr. Lowell closed his clipboard with a soft snap. "The captain rides again," he said. I smiled awkwardly, waiting for a laugh that didn't come. By the time they left, the sun was sliding behind the trees, bleeding amber light across the lawn. The oak's ribbon glowed faintly crimson in the dusk. I unpacked, trying not to think about the phrase hallowed ground or the strange smell that still lingered. But as night fell and the crickets started up, I noticed something else. Faint, rhythmic, and distant, like a single horse pacing somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, slow and deliberate. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor's pet, maybe my imagination filling the silence. But when I stepped out to the porch and listened again, I swear the sound stopped the moment I exhaled. And from the oak tree at the edge of my yard, the red ribbon was gone. The first full morning in Patriot's Hollow began with the quiet kind of sunlight that looks clean but feels hollow. No sirens, no traffic, No shouting neighbors. Just trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and an unnatural stillness that hummed beneath everything. Like a radio tuned to static you couldn't quite hear. I made coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and realized something small but unsettling. The ribbon from the oak tree hadn't just fallen. It had vanished. The branch where it had hung bore a fresh gouge, as if a blade had scored through bark and sap in one clean, deliberate line. When I went to look closer, that's when I saw it. Beneath the roots, half swallowed by moss and age, were words carved deep into the trunk. Letters gouged with something sharp, uneven, but legible. The wood had warped around them over the years, but I could still make them out, one by one. The Colonial Rules. Rule 1. Never work the land after midnight. That's when the dead still march. Rule 2. If you hear hoofbeats, stand still and bow your head. Rule 3. If the air smells of gunpowder, extinguish all lights. He hunts by flame. Rule 4. Do not speak ill of the war dead. Their captain listens for treason. Rule 5. If you see a rider without a head, salute him. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of local prank, a relic from the community's obsession with heritage. But the letters were old, decades at least. The grooves were blackened, as if the wood had been scorched into obedience. When I touched the carvings, the surface was cold. Not the kind of cold that came from shade or dew. A wrong kind of cold, like the bark itself had been hollowed of warmth. I backed away, heart thudding, and that was when the mail carrier startled me. She was a wiry, elderly woman, with a sun hat so wide it looked like a halo of straw. Her name tag read Mrs. Abernathy, and her voice carried the scratchy timbre of someone who'd smoked for 40 years and learned every secret this town tried to bury. "You found the rules, didn't you?" she asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Yeah," I said. "What is that? Some HOA scare tactic?" Her smile was thin, the kind that doesn't mean amusement. "Oh no, dear. The HOA only enforces what can be put on paper. The rules," she nodded toward the oak. "Those come from the land itself. The land." She leaned against the fence post, her bag of letters swaying against her hip. "You're standing on the Battle of Crossridge, July 16th, 1778. This street, Independence Lane, used to be the cart path the colonial cavalry charged down that morning. A slaughterhouse by noon. I tried to picture it. The spotless lawns, the cul-de-sac lined with flower beds, superimposed over smoke, blood, and shouts. They say the captain, Thaddeus Crane, rode at the front," Mrs. Abernathy went on. "A good man, loyal, until the cannonball took his head clean off. They buried what was left of him right here, before the British could find the bodies. When the developers came, they paved the trail over his grave. The HOA made it sound romantic. Homes built on hallowed ground. But the captain never left." I laughed softly, trying to steer it back to reason. "And you believe that? That a headless soldier haunts the cul-de-sac?" Her eyes, sharp, gray, and unblinking, didn't move. "Belief doesn't matter, dear. The rules do." A breeze stirred, carrying the faintest trace of sulfur. That burnt metallic tang I'd smelled last night, gunpowder. This street, Independence Lane, used to be the cart path the colonial cavalry charged down that morning. A slaughterhouse by noon. I tried to picture it. The spotless lawns, the cul-de-sac lined with flower beds, superimposed over smoke, blood, and shouts. They say the captain, Thaddeus Crane, rode at the front, Mrs. Abernathy went on. A good man, loyal, until the cannonball took his head clean off. They buried what was left of him right here, before the British could find the bodies. When the developers came, they paved the trail over his grave. The HOA made it sound romantic. Homes built on hallowed ground. But the captain never left. I laughed softly, trying to steer it back to reason. "And you believe that? That a headless soldier haunts the cul-de-sac?" Her eyes, sharp, gray, and unblinking, didn't move. "Belief doesn't matter, dear. The rules do." A breeze stirred, carrying the faintest trace of sulfur. That burnt metallic tang I'd smelled last night, gunpowder. "Because when the captain rides," she said softly, The air smells like that. Something creaked behind me. The porch swing swayed. No wind touched it. I felt it then. The steady rhythmic pulse of something underfoot. Not quite sound, not quite vibration. A heartbeat in the ground itself. Mrs. Abernathy seemed to sense my unease. She tipped her hat and began walking up the street. "Just keep your head down and your lights off if you ever smell powder," she called back. "That's your only warning." When she was gone, I stood for a long time in front of that oak tree. The letters seemed darker now, deeper, as though they'd been freshly carved while I wasn't looking. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind made me think of hooves. And though I kept the curtains closed, I could swear. In that thin space between dreams and waking, I saw faint sparks in the air outside, like musket fire far away and getting closer. Next morning began with the sound of engines and shouting. A disruption that felt almost violent in Patriot's Hollow, where even leaf blowers seemed to hum politely. By the time I walked outside, 3 moving trucks were parked across the cul-de-sac, hazard lights blinking like a warning. The vehicles dwarfed the manicured houses and trampled the edge of the carefully trimmed lawns. Men in blue uniforms carried boxes stamped with Fisher Estate Management, and standing at the center of it all was Mr. Barrett. Arms folded, sunglasses glinting. I didn't know his first name then. The HOA bulletin board would later identify him as Lawrence Barrett, financial advisor. His wife was Ellen, a willowy woman who seemed to flinch from sound. And their son Kyle, a lanky 16-year-old in a designer hoodie, dragging his feet and scowling like the world owed him something. From the start, something about them clashed with the neighborhood. Not just their volume, but their attitude. Patriot's Hollow was built on pretense. Polite smiles, curated lawns, the unspoken understanding that every home here existed to perform wealth, not display it. But the Barretts didn't perform. They announced. "Guess we're finally getting a little excitement around here," murmured Mrs. Abernathy as she handed me my mail that morning. "Who are they?" I asked. "New money," she said with a sour twist of her lips. "Came up from Dallas. Heard they made their fortune flipping commercial lots. Probably think history means the price of an antique chandelier." Her tone was half amusement, half warning. By afternoon, Lawrence Barrett had already made his introduction. Not through pleasantries, but by summoning 3 contractors to his driveway. I watched from my porch as he stood with a blueprint rolled under one arm, gesturing broadly toward his house and the tree-lined slope beyond. "Right here," he said, his voice cutting clean across the street. "We'll expand the drive out another 20 feet. I want space for the Escalade and the boat trailer. HOA can send me a letter if they have a problem." One of the workers hesitated, glancing toward the narrow trail that curved behind his property. The overgrown path that still bore the uneven stones of the Colonial Cart Road. Everyone in the neighborhood knew it was part of the preserved heritage strip. Kids weren't even allowed to play near it. "Sir," said one of the men, "that path's under the preservation zone. There's a marker back there, says Historic Trail." "I don't give a damn what it says," Barrett snapped. "It's my property line. I bought it. That means I own it. The past doesn't pay my mortgage." The worker's mouth tightened. He looked ready to argue, but Barrett cut him off with a wave. "Start tomorrow," he said. 7 sharp. By dinner, word had spread. Patriot's Hollow was small, and gossip moved faster than mail. That night, I heard it all, whispered through hedges and carried by the porch lights. "He's digging into the battlefield. Doesn't he know about the captain? You don't touch the trail. No one touches the trail." The next morning, a delegation formed. 3 of the longest residents, Mrs. Abernathy, a retired history teacher named Mr. Coleman, and a man from the HOA board, walked over to the Barrett's house. I followed at a distance, pretending to check my mailbox but too curious to hide it. Barrett stood in his driveway with a mug of coffee and a look that said he'd been waiting for a confrontation. "Morning, folks," he said. "Something you need?" "Lawrence," Mr. Coleman began carefully, "we just wanted to talk about your construction plans. You might not know, but your property backs onto what used to be the old Colonial Road, the one Captain Crane's cavalry took during the Battle of Crossridge. The town built this development around it for a reason. Barrett smirked. You mean the ghost stories? They're not stories, Mrs. Abernathy said sharply. They're warnings. That ground's seen blood. You disturb it, it stirs back. He laughed. Full, loud, echoing off the manicured houses. Lady, I don't believe in bedtime fairy tales. I believe in resale value. You people act like you're living in a museum. Ellen Barrett appeared behind him then, standing in the doorway. She didn't speak. She looked pale, her fingers gripping the frame as though she might fall if she let go. Mr. Barrett? The HOA man tried again. There are regulations about digging on marked historical. I'll pay the fine. Barrett's tone hardened. You think I'm scared of some old bones? You can't guilt me into superstition. This is my land now. The conversation dissolved into tension. Coleman raised his voice. Abernathy called him a fool. Ellen's eyes darted from face to face, lips trembling, as if she wanted to intervene but didn't dare. Kyle appeared beside her, headphones around his neck, smirking. Dad, these people are nuts, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Talking about ghosts like it's real life. Barrett clapped him on the shoulder. See? Kids got more sense than this whole town. Mrs. Abernathy's expression turned almost pitying. You'll learn, she said quietly. The captain always teaches his lesson. Barrett laughed again, but this time it sounded thinner, forced. When the residents finally left, he turned to his son. We start digging tomorrow, he said. Maybe I'll find your ghost a new driveway. I couldn't shake the image of them standing there in the dark, floodlights washing over the old trail like interrogation lamps. I imagined the sound of shovels striking stone, and something older, deeper beneath it. When I finally went to bed, the house was silent, except for the faint rattle of my bedroom window. I thought it was wind, until I caught a scent that didn't belong. Sharp, metallic, burnt, gunpowder. Somewhere in the distance, like thunder rolling over hills long dead, came the faint echo of hooves. By sunrise, the stillness shattered. The contractors arrived with diesel engines growling, the heavy machinery rumbling over the once quiet street. Their work lights blinked like fireflies, cutting across the early fog that always settled low in Patriot's Hollow. From my porch, I watched as they drove steel stakes into the ground and began marking off the expansion line. That line cut straight across the mossy stretch where the old colonial trail disappeared into the trees. I could see it clearly now, the faint indentation of wagon ruts, half swallowed by centuries of soil. They painted right over it with orange spray paint. The sight made my stomach twist. Across the street, Mrs. Abernathy stood at her mailbox, her robe drawn tightly around her shoulders. Her face looked bloodless. They shouldn't be doing this, she murmured. He'll come riding. The captain always comes riding. Her expression kept me silent. By noon, the Barrett property looked like a battlefield in miniature. Dirt piled high, tire tracks carved into the grass, jackhammers splitting the ground. I saw Ellen watching from the upstairs window, her reflection trembling in the glass. When our eyes met, she drew the curtains closed. Kyle, meanwhile, strutted around like a general, holding a can of soda and recording videos on his phone. #ghost driveway, he said, laughing. Let's see your headless cavalry stop a caterpillar. Even the contractors looked uneasy. I caught one of them wiping sweat from his brow, glancing nervously at the tree line. You feel that? He asked another. The air's off. Probably the septic line, the other muttered, but his voice wavered. By the time evening came, the street had emptied. The hum of machinery died away, leaving an unnatural quiet. Even the cicadas seemed to have fallen silent. I was standing at my kitchen sink when it happened, the sound that made my heart lurch. Hoofbeats, not far away. Steady, deliberate, echoing against pavement. It was unmistakable. At first, I thought it might be a horse from one of the rural properties up north, but the rhythm was wrong. Each impact rang like iron striking stone. The rules carved into the oak tree burned in my memory. If you hear hoofbeats, stand still and bow your head. I didn't move. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat as I backed into the middle of the room. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, moving down the street. My lights flickered, then silence. Not the absence of sound, but a pressure, thick and waiting. I felt it on my skin, a chill brushing the nape of my neck. When I dared to glance out the window, I saw nothing. Only the faint shimmer of fog curling low to the ground. I stayed frozen until the smell faded, until my heart stopped clawing at my ribs. When I finally went to bed, I left the lights off, the rules echoing in my head like scripture. The next morning, screams shattered the fragile peace of dawn. It was one of the contractors, a man named Dave, stumbling down the street, his hands and jeans stained with dirt and something darker. "Call the cops," he shouted. "Jesus Christ, call someone." I threw on a robe and ran outside. A few neighbors were already gathering by the Barrett property, their faces pale, eyes wide. The truck, the same one I'd watched idle by the trail yesterday, was still there. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks. The hood crumpled inward as if something massive had struck it from above. Steam hissed from the radiator, curling up like smoke from a cannon's mouth. The smell hit first, burnt rubber, oil, and beneath it, that same stinging trace of gunpowder. "Where's Rick?" someone asked. Dave just shook his head, stumbling back. He's gone. His head's just gone. The police came within minutes, their sirens shattering the morning calm. They roped off the scene, forced everyone back. I could still see enough from my porch to notice the way the asphalt had darkened. It wasn't oil, it wasn't fire damage. It looked scorched, a black circle seared into the earth, still faintly steaming. When one of the officers touched it with a gloved hand, he recoiled. "It's warm," I heard him say. Lawrence Barrett stood near the wreckage, arms crossed but face pale. He was saying something to a detective, gesturing toward the road, his voice rising. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. His posture screamed denial, anger barely holding back fear. Ellen was nowhere to be seen. By the time the body was taken away, word spread through the Patriot's hollow. People whispered that there hadn't been blood, that the man's head hadn't been severed so much as erased, the wound smooth as glass. By dusk, the entire work crew had quit. No one wanted to go near the site again. Men who'd grown up with shovels and dynamite suddenly remembered they had other jobs, other towns to visit, sick relatives to care for. The machines were left abandoned in Barrett's yard like hulking metal corpses. Lawrence Barrett didn't take the news well. He stormed out onto his porch, wearing a robe and clutching a tumbler of whiskey, his face flushed with anger and sleeplessness. "So that's it?" he shouted to no one in particular, though me and two other neighbors watched from the edge of the road. A freak accident happens, and suddenly the whole damn town's possessed by ghost stories? His voice echoed off the old maples. The air itself seemed to recoil. "Lawrence," Mrs. Lowell called carefully, stepping forward a little. "You don't understand. It's not just superstition. You tore up the old road, the Colonial path, the one that runs from the churchyard to the ravine. You shouldn't have." "Don't tell me what I shouldn't have done," he barked, slamming his glass down so hard it shattered on the porch rail. "You people live in the past. Headless horsemen, ancient curses, colonial nonsense. You're like children hiding under the bed. This is my property. I pay the taxes, and I'll damn well pave whatever I want." His son, Matthew, stood behind him, smirking with the hollow confidence of youth that doesn't yet understand consequence. The boy wore expensive sneakers and wireless earbuds, scrolling absently on his phone while his father raged at the locals. Inside the house, Lawrence's wife peeked through the curtains, her face pale, eyes rimmed with red. When she met my gaze, she mouthed, "I'm sorry." That night, as the last of the daylight bled from the sky, a storm gathered on the horizon. The locals stayed inside, shutters closed, lamps dimmed. I sat by my window with a cup of tea gone cold, watching lightning flicker in the distance. Each flash seemed to outline the dark ridge where the old trail ran. A notice from the HOA appeared in every mailbox. Until further notice, all residents are asked to refrain from outdoor activity after dark. Please remain respectful of historical sites. It wasn't signed, but everyone knew who'd written it. As I stood on my porch reading it, the breeze shifted. I caught the faintest echo of hooves again, distant this time, receding toward the woods. And for the first time since moving to Patriot's Hollow, I whispered a thank you to the darkness and bowed my head. I should have known the Barrett boy would be the one to push it too far. It happened late in the afternoon, that kind of dry, brittle autumn light that makes the trees look like they're holding their breath. I was tending my garden, trimming back the dead stalks of goldenrod, when I heard laughter coming from the road near the war memorial. Not the good kind of laughter either, the mean kind, sharp, young, and careless. When I rounded the bend, I saw him, Kyle Barrett, standing at the Horseman's stone. The old memorial sat at the fork in the road, a slab of gray granite surrounded by iron fencing. It was supposed to be a marker for the fallen cavalryman, the one whose spirit haunted our hollow. The air around it always felt heavier, as if the world leaned in closer there. Kyle held a can of red spray paint in one hand, a smirk carved across his face. "Kid," I called out before I could stop myself. "What do you think you're doing?" He looked up, startled at first, then grinned like he'd been waiting for an audience. "Just giving your ghost cowboy some color," he said, shaking the can and spraying a crude dripping circle over the engraved name. "Maybe he'll finally see it, if he's even real." My throat went dry. "You don't know what you're—" "Oh, I know," he interrupted, voice rising. "You people are obsessed with your stupid stories. You think some headless soldier's gonna come galloping out of the mist because I tagged a rock. It's 2012, lady. Grow up." He laughed and drew horns above the etched carving of the cavalry officer. Then, satisfied with his vandalism, he tossed the can into the ditch and walked off toward his house, still laughing. The smell of paint lingered, harsh and chemical, but beneath it, faint and fleeting, I thought I caught something else, like gunpowder. That night, the air was too still, the kind of stillness that feels intentional, like the world is waiting for something. I sat up in bed around midnight, the sheets twisted around my legs, and realized what it was that had woken me. That smell again, burnt powder and metal. The clock on my nightstand read 12:03 a.m. I turned off the lamp. The darkness settled in heavy and complete, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then I heard it, the hooves. At first, I thought it was thunder. Slow, distant, rolling through the ground. But it didn't fade like thunder. It grew sharper, heavier, echoing up the road. Each strike landed with purpose, like a drumbeat from the other side of time. I crept to the window, heart hammering so hard it made my vision pulse. The curtains were half drawn, but through the narrow gap I could see the road. The fog had rolled in thick and low, curling between the trees like smoke. And then he came, the Horseman. No ghostly shimmer or half-seen blur. He was there, solid, immense, terrible. His uniform was colonial blue, torn and blackened at the seams. Across his chest, the insignia of a cavalry officer gleamed faintly, wet with fresh blood. He rode a massive black horse, its eyes burning like coals, steam hissing from its nostrils as it pawed the dirt. Chains hung from the saddle, clinking softly, dragging behind like the sound of distant thunder. Where his head should have been, only the stump, dark and raw, as if it had been taken moments ago. And from the open wound, wisps of pale smoke drifted upward into the night. He turned. I don't know how I knew he was looking at me, but I felt it, that weight, that unnatural awareness pressing through the glass. My body acted before my mind could argue. I stood straight, brought my hand to my forehead, and saluted. The air trembled. The smell of gunpowder deepened, metallic and bitter. For a long, shattering moment, he didn't move. Then the horse snorted, and the rider straightened in the saddle. Slowly, almost with dignity, the horseman lifted one gloved hand to his chest in acknowledgement. And then he turned his mount toward the fog. The hooves faded into the mist, rhythmic, echoing, until only silence remained. When I finally let go of the curtains, my hand was trembling so hard I could hear the fabric rustle. I fell asleep late. It was difficult to calm down and relax after such events. The scream woke me before the sun did. It wasn't the kind of startled cry that drifts through morning windows. It was deeper, sharper, raw, the kind of sound that empties a person out. For a few seconds, I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Then it came again, closer this time, echoing up the cul-de-sac. My first thought was not again. I threw on a sweater and ran barefoot into the front yard. The air was cold and thin, the fog still clinging low over the lawns like spilled milk. Across the street, people were beginning to gather, their pajamas and bathrobes ghostly in the haze. The sound came from near the old memorial. I followed the others down the street, gravel biting into my feet, the chill crawling up my spine. Even before I reached the crowd, I knew something terrible waited there. You could feel it, the same way you can sense static before a storm. When I broke through the ring of neighbors, I stopped dead. Lawrence Barrett was on his knees in the grass. His face was twisted in a way I will never forget. Veins bulging at his temples, spit flying from his mouth, eyes wide and red. He was screaming so loudly it barely sounded human anymore. In front of him lay his son, or what was left of him. Kyle's body was sprawled at the base of the memorial, arms at unnatural angles, shirt torn open down the chest. His hands were clenched into tight, awful fists. His head. It took me several long, frozen seconds to register what I was looking at. Was gone. There was no blood splatter, no gore, just an absence clean and impossible. Like someone had taken an eraser to reality and wiped it away. Beside the body, driven deep into the earth, was an antique cavalry saber. The hilt gleamed faintly in the weak morning light, its brass guard mottled with green age. A faint mist coiled around it. Not smoke, not breath, something in between. And on the memorial stone behind them, where Kyle's graffiti had been the day before, there was nothing. Not a trace of red. The granite was spotless, as if scrubbed by unseen hands. The silence that followed his scream was worse than the noise itself. No one moved. A woman from down the block started whispering prayers under her breath. Another neighbor, Mr. Collier, took off his hat and crossed himself. The only sound was Lawrence's ragged breathing, the kind that scrapes the bottom of the lungs. Then he snapped. He lunged at the nearest man, poor Mr. Grayson, and started swinging. Wild, desperate punches, fueled by grief more than rage. "You did this?" he shouted, voice breaking. "You sick bastards. You think this is funny? You killed my boy." It took 3 men to drag him off. He kicked, clawed, screamed until his throat went hoarse. I backed away, my legs shaking, my vision tunneling. When the sheriff's car pulled up minutes later, lights flashing weakly in the mist, the air still smelled faintly of gunpowder. Sheriff Holt stepped out, tall, stone-faced, a man who'd seen plenty of strange things in this county but never this. He knelt beside the body, then looked up at the crowd with an expression I can only describe as reverent fear. No one spoke when they lifted Kyle's remains into the coroner's van. Lawrence had stopped struggling by then. He just stared as they loaded his son inside. Blank, broken. His lips moved, but no sound came out. They put him in handcuffs, mostly to keep him from hurting anyone else, and guided him gently toward the sheriff's cruiser. As they passed, he turned his head toward us, eyes hollow, and whispered hoarsely, "You knew. All of you knew." I didn't have the heart to answer. The sheriff's car pulled away, its tires crunching over gravel. The fog seemed to close behind it like a curtain. When everyone else finally drifted back to their homes, I stayed a moment longer by the memorial. The saber was gone now, taken for evidence, I assumed. But when I crouched down, I noticed something glinting in the dirt where it had been. A single musket ball, old, dented, still warm to the touch. When I finally crawled back into bed, I could still hear the echo of hooves in my mind. Slow, steady, patient, like someone out there was still riding. Weeks passed, though in Patriot's Hollow, time didn't flow so much as circle. Every morning, the same lawns gleamed like emerald glass. The same sprinklers whispered along the curbs, washing the asphalt as if cleansing it of history. The HOA newsletter still came, full of reminders about Patriot pride, flag placement, and lawn height. On the surface, the neighborhood looked immaculate again, its tragedies neatly trimmed, polished, and hidden. But if you lived here long enough, you learned to listen between the sounds. The quiet was never really quiet. Beneath the chirping birds and distant hum of lawnmowers, there was always a low rhythmic pulse, like the slow heartbeat of something sleeping beneath the ground. Patient, ancient, waiting. I tried not to think about Kyle Barrett. The memorial was spotless again, flowers perpetually fresh. The sheriff had called it a freak crime, maybe even a ritual killing. Though no one ever said the words out loud, Lawrence Barrett's rage had flared and burned out in days. They said he hanged himself in his garage a week after the funeral. His wife left town before dawn 2 days later. Their perfect white colonial house at the corner of Liberty Lane now stood empty, the windows reflecting nothing but sky. And so Patriot's Hollow went back to smiling. But the smiles were tighter now, more brittle. The rules, once whispered half-jokingly over coffee or porch gossip by newcomers, were now followed with religious precision. No one watered lawns after sunset. No porch lights were left burning past midnight. When the wind changed and carried that faint tang of gunpowder through the air, the whole neighborhood seemed to collectively hold its breath. And me? I adapted. I found myself extinguishing candles without thinking, pausing at the faint sound of hooves, lowering my head instinctively. I stopped calling it superstition. I started calling it respect. Last night, I even caught myself whispering, "Thank you, Captain," when my car stalled at the edge of the battlefield road and started again a moment later. It slipped out naturally, like saying grace. I wasn't the same woman who'd moved here, fresh from a divorce, defiant, and dismissive of all this heritage nonsense. Something had settled in me, not fear exactly, but a deep, uneasy reverence. This morning, as I was trimming my hedges, Miss Abernathy waved me over from across the street. She was sitting on her porch swing, wrapped in a heavy shawl despite the July heat. A glass of lemonade trembled slightly in her hands, and her eyes, cloudy with age but still sharp, followed every car that passed, like she was keeping count of the living. "Come, child," she said as I crossed the street. "You've been quiet lately. That's good. The quiet ones last the longest here." I managed a small smile and sat beside her. The air smelled faintly of mint and rust. "Tomorrow," she continued, her voice low, "is July 16th. She didn't need to explain. Everyone in Patriot's Hollow knew the date by heart. The Battle of Crossridge had been fought right here 247 years ago. Every year, the townsfolk left flowers along the roads. Not for show, not for history, but for peace. Miss Abernathy leaned closer. "You'll join us, won't you?" I nodded. "Of course." Her expression softened a little, though her hands still gripped the armrest. "Good. The captain notices those who honor him. We've seen what happens to those who don't." She didn't have to mention the Barretts. The silence did that for her. "The flowers go out at dusk," she said. "Red carnations, mostly. Some use roses. The captain doesn't mind. What matters is that the road is dressed before the dark comes." "And what about tomorrow night?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes darted to the oak tree that loomed behind her house, the same one where the rules had been found carved. "Tomorrow night," she said slowly. "No one goes outside, not for anything. The air will hum and the lights will flicker. That's when the old battle rides again. When the dead remember." She turned to me then, her face drawn tight, her voice trembling with conviction. "Promise me, Susie, you'll stay inside." I wanted to ask more, but the words caught in my throat. Behind her, the sun had dipped low, painting the cul-de-sac in red gold light, the color of musket fire. "I promise," I said. Her expression softened. "Good girl. You're one of us now. By noon, The air shimmered with heat. People lingered by the roadside, leaving their flowers, saluting, whispering little prayers. There were no barbecues, no laughter, no music. Patriot's Hollow might have looked like any 4th of July suburb from the outside, but the reverence here was different. Quieter, heavier, older. As evening approached, the sky turned a bruised purple. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, though the forecast had called for clear skies. I stayed inside as instructed, locking every door, drawing every curtain. The carnations by my window had wilted faster than they should have, their petals curling inward like tiny red tongues. The power flickered twice, then went still. I sat on the couch with the lights off, my phone on silent, heart ticking in time with the creaks of the house. Every so often, a gust of wind rattled the window panes, and the air would carry with it that faint, unmistakable smell. Gunpowder and ash. It wasn't just a scent anymore. It was a feeling, a vibration in my bones, the same way you feel thunder before it breaks. When the clock in my hall struck 12 p.m., something changed. The stillness fractured. Outside, a dull glow began to pulse through the curtains. Not electric, not moonlight, but something raw and flickering, like the reflection of distant fire. I hesitated, remembering Miss Abernathy's warning, but curiosity, or maybe dread, drove me closer. I parted the curtain just enough to see the street, and I will never forget what I saw. The road was full, not of cars, not of people, but soldiers. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, lining both sides of the street as far as I could see. Some wore colonial blue, their coats ragged and torn. Others bore the red of British uniforms, caked in soot and blood. They shimmered faintly, translucent, flickering like images projected on smoke. Their faces were hollow, their mouths opened and closed in silent screams. Then came the noise, not from outside, but through the air, through the ground itself. The crack of muskets, the metallic ring of bayonets, cannons booming so loud the glass trembled. It was as if the entire Battle of Crossridge was unfolding in front of me, centuries collapsing into a single burning instant. Smoke rolled across the lawns, thick and black. I saw men grappling, stabbing, falling. I saw the blood splash and vanish before it hit the ground. The air rippled with heat, and lightning split the sky. Bright, silent forks of white light that illuminated the chaos below. And then, the sound that made my heart stop, hoofbeats. A deep pounding rhythm that grew until I could feel it in my chest, my throat, the soles of my feet. The soldiers froze, parting in perfect unison, like an old memory remembered too clearly. Out of the fog rode the Horseman. He was taller than before, his mount a black smoke-colored stallion whose hooves left burning prints on the asphalt. His uniform, tattered and blood-stained, still bore the faint outline of a revolutionary insignia. A sash hung across his chest, torn and soaked in something darker than rain. And of course, he had no head. Where it should have been was a column of smoke and fire, twisting upward, pulsing faintly like the afterglow of cannon fire. He carried his saber raised high, a blade that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. The Captain of Crossridge had returned. He rode slowly down the street, the spectral soldiers falling into formation behind him. Every window he passed seemed to dim, every shadow to deepen. When he reached the memorial at the entrance of the hollow, the same one Kyle Barrett had defiled, he stopped. His horse reared, hooves striking sparks off the pavement. The captain raised his sword in a salute, and then, as if bound by unseen chains, the blade froze midair. A silence fell so deep it made my ears ache. The smoke thickened, swirling around the Horseman in tight circles. One by one, the soldiers around him lowered their weapons, their faces softening from fury to something like peace. The captain bowed his invisible head toward the memorial and dissolved. No dramatic flash, no scream, just a sudden implosion, his form unraveling into black dust that spread across the road like spilled ink. The soldiers followed, vanishing into the same drifting powder. When the wind finally picked up again, it carried that dust into the sky. And then came the rain, heavy, cold, and smelling of iron. The street was empty. No smoke, no soldiers. Just a quiet suburban road, slick with rainwater and strewn with red petals from the flowers we'd left. I stood there long after the thunder faded, staring through the glass, barely breathing. Somewhere, a single gunshot echoed in the distance, faint and final. I whispered without meaning to, "Thank you, Captain." Morning felt like the hangover of a nightmare that refused to die. The first thing that woke me wasn't the sunlight, but the hum of voices outside my window. Dozens of them, whispering, arguing, weeping. I pushed the curtains aside and looked down onto Main Street. Every lamppost from the square to the war memorial was shattered. Glass scattered like frost across the asphalt. Power lines drooped like dead snakes. The pavement itself was marked by black streaks and perfect circles of ash, like the ghosts of cannon blasts. Some cars had been dented, their alarms whining faintly until someone yanked the batteries out. I stepped outside, drawn by the murmuring crowd. People gathered in clusters, still in pajamas, faces pale and sleepless. No one had really slept, I think. Near the old oak by the memorial, the sheriff stood with his hat in his hands, staring up at the trunk. That's when I saw it. The message carved deep into the bark, each letter gouged in clean and deliberate lines. "Don't forget where you stand. Respect the fallen or join them." Someone gasped. A woman began to pray quietly. I just stood there, staring. The cuts in the wood were still fresh, oozing sap that looked too much like blood in the wet dawn light. Miss Abernathy was beside me, clutching her shawl. Her voice trembled when she whispered, "He's reminding us. Every year we remember them. But last night, he reminded us." The sheriff ordered a few deputies to keep people back, though he looked just as shaken as the rest of us. He didn't even try to explain it away. No mention of vandals, no talk of pranks. I think he knew. We all did. The town's maintenance crew worked through the morning, replacing fuses, fixing transformers, sweeping up the broken glass. Their orange vests glowed like embers in the fog. The street smelled of ozone and something heavier, metallic. It clung to the air, faint but unmistakable, no matter how much the rain tried to wash it away. By noon, life began to stir again. Shops opened late. People spoke in low tones, their laughter nervous, brittle. A few tourists who'd been staying in nearby inns drove off without checking out. I couldn't blame them. I wanted to visit my friend. So, I got into my car and began to drive down the main road. I noticed how the trees seemed darker now, the bark blackened at the roots, as if they'd been licked by invisible flames. The sky hung low and colorless, and the rain turned everything slick and reflective. As I passed the war memorial, I slowed down. Someone, maybe Miss Abernathy, had already placed a fresh wreath at its base. The nameplates gleamed faintly beneath the drizzle. I rolled my window down just enough for the damp air to creep in. And that's when I smelled it again. Gunpowder. A warning or maybe a promise. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel tighter than I needed to. Somewhere deep down, I knew Patriot's Hollow would never really be quiet again. Not for me. Not for anyone who'd seen the Horseman ride. And sometimes, when the night grows still and the wind shifts just right, I swear I can still hear the distant echo of hooves. Steady, patient, reminding us of the price of forgetting.